Right, we're recording. Hi, everybody. I'm here with Claire Hamilton, and we're going to be talking about recruiter enablement. So, Claire, thank you for joining me today. And give us a quick introduction. Give us a bit about your background and like what you do today.
Hi, Adam. I'm Claire Hamilton, Head of Talent Acquisition for the UK for Capgemini. I've been in recruitment as long as you, so a bit long in the tooth, and
Was
I've
it
been,
99 you started?
yeah,
It was,
99.
yeah, I seem
Yeah.
to remember. Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Right.
so graduated and straight into a recruitment job in an agency.
Yeah, switch.
Worked in MSP and then RPO. So I've been with Alexander Mann, with Korn Ferry, and with Connexa, then IBM. So did 10 years at IBM and then came in-house. So I've gone poacher turned gamekeeper, and seen a number of different clients go through sort of transformation and RPO outsourcing and then insourcing. So it's been a really interesting journey over the last however many years, many
Yeah.
of them. Yeah.
Okay, so recruiter enablement, what is it to you?
So for me, it's really looking at how we can allow a recruiter to have everything they need at their fingertips, in order to be successful. And what I mean by that is they should be able to sell the opportunity. So they need to have the capability to say, I can tell you a lot about why it's great to work here, but also why it's great to do this job here. And I think some of the things we miss, when we're looking at bringing a new recruiter into an organization are how do we set them up for success? So how do they understand what the EVP is and how do they then sell it? How do they understand the nuances of the fact that they may be looking one day at a role in programming and one day at a role in consulting? How do we differentiate between what's good for a programmer versus what's good for a consultant? So there's a lot of work that needs to be done to allow that recruiter. And I'm trying, it's almost like that Radio 4 show. I'm trying not to use the word enablement because it's, I haven't a clue, or whatever one it is, they'll call me out. But yeah, trying to be able to give a recruiter the tools that will allow them to be convincing, to sell the role, and to also be knowledgeable enough about what they're doing that they can go to market, whether it be on the phone to a candidate, whether it be sending some form of outreach, or whether it is being out there on social. How do they do that? What's the best way to do that? And what are the hashtags to use? There's a whole load of stuff in there that really is all over the place at the moment.
Yeah.
And they may need to ask like 5 people in order to post something. They may need to go and do a learning on our learning page before they post on social media, and
Yeah.
they've got to find that first. And there's a whole load of, it's about speed and pace. So our role is always complicated as recruiters. People kind of think, yeah, you just got to sell a job. You haven't. You've got to do way more than that. There's all the stuff behind the scenes as well.
So I want to, I'm going to ask you in a minute about like any things that you've done which have made a difference or things that you'd recommend that people do. But I actually do want to touch on two specific items that you brought up there. One was about giving recruiters the ability to sell. And it's funny, we often think about the selling aspect in recruitment as being something that recruitment agencies do. But of course, in-house teams have to sell the organization. They
Mm-hmm.
have to sell that team that they're representing, and they have to sell the hiring manager, and they have to sell the job. And one of the things that I don't believe wholesale we've done great is given them access to, like, here's the elevator pitch. Here's the elevator pitch for our company. Here's the
Mm-hmm.
elevator pitch for the engineering team, for the consulting team, for
Yeah.
the whatever else it is, because each team should have a different kind of elevator pitch.
Yeah.
We also don't typically give them, here is how to handle objections when they
Yeah.
say, well, look, I'm working in a product company. I'm not sure I'd want to work in consulting. Why would that be good for me? I also don't think we give them like battle cards. We don't give them, well, that person's working at Accenture, or they're working at Tata, or they're working at whoever else it is that might be in your industry. Well, how does our company compare to those organizations, and what's all the
Mm-hmm.
information and knowledge that we've got on them? Um, you know, is this something that you've like? Have you done anything formal on that area around helping with the sell?
Absolutely. And I think this is where working in RPO is so good for so many people, because you're not just embedded in one company. You know, and one of the things I loved about RPO was going into a new client, setting it all up, getting everyone ready to launch a new TA model. And that was, these are the kind of the foundational steps we always took. There would be that kind of fact-finding mission, because often you're handed a client that's out of industry. You know, I've moved around from rail to construction to engineering to manufacturing to banking, you know, and you kind of, when you look across those industries, they're all so different. So you have to learn each time. And we would start off at ground zero, kind of going, okay, so who are the key competitors? We do this kind of landscape of making sure we could enable our teams to know what they're looking for. So it would start with key competitors. You'd then look inside the company, exactly what you've said. You know, the engineering business would have a different sell to the consulting business, to, you know, and as you'd go through, you would build, and I always call it the spiel, you know, so you start, and I can still do it from 20 years ago, a job that I had, and we used to sell the client. It was a, you know, consolidation of 4 companies, and you kind of, you have to have that pitch so it sounds smooth, and that you are part of it, that you really, you know, you believe in it. So there was a big part around, okay, so this is the company, this is, you know, the 5 key facts that someone will need to know about a company. These are the things about each of those different departments inside. These are the competitors. So things like Accenture offer this versus we offer that. You know, so looking at that softer stuff around the emotional pull for people into a job as well. So we would always start with that. Let's build this bank of how to sell, you know, what are the parts. And I think people forget that a recruiter isn't just moving a candidate through status steps in an ATS. You know, there's a whole load of other stuff that they have to do. And actually, recruiters generally don't like that stuff in the background, that admin kind of nonsense that gets in the way, because they want to be talking to people, and they want to be out there matching people to the right roles. So I think, yes, there was always, that was the first approach, you know, part of setting up the operations, templating stuff. So being able to have a screening document that means you know what you're capturing throughout the process for the candidate. It's consistent, but also then the screening becomes more than that. And people that see this, that have worked with me, will go, oh, here we go. You know, the screening becomes your opportunity to sell that candidate to the client, to the hiring manager.
Yeah.
So providing that kind of little box at the top that says, this is why this candidate is the one that you should choose, so that the hiring manager is going to meet them, and encouraging people to look for reasons to hire people rather than reasons not to. And I think that kind of goes throughout the process. And I've been saying this all week. We've got to look for reasons to hire people rather than reasons not to.
Absolutely. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. The second thing I wanted to talk about, which you mentioned earlier, was the fact that recruiters will one day be working on this type of job in the morning, and in the afternoon they're working on a completely different job. And let's face it, like when you and I started in a recruitment agency, we could be specialists in recruiting that narrow area that we were recruiting within that small geographical area. We were, you know, that was easy to do. But in an in-house team, you're typically working on 20, 30, 40 recs. So it's impossible to be a real specialist in that. And I had a guy come and join me on the show, on this show, like back at the very beginning, about 6 weeks ago, who runs a business called TA Guru. And what TA Guru does is it gives recruiters quick understanding of what different skills are and what different roles are and things like that, so that they understand how to talk competently to candidates and to hiring managers. And I think that's a really cool business. So shout out to TA Guru. But like, how have you done this in the past? Enabled recruiters to understand all the different plethora of jobs that they might be hiring for?
Yeah, and that's always the difficulty. You know, with one client previously, I remember being given a role. I was like, that's not a real job title. I've never heard of that in my life. And it was a job. I just hadn't come across it before, you know, but I did it by Googling at that point, you know, and going back 20 odd years when I first started, there was, in the early days of the internet, there was a website called whatis.com. And I used it all the time. It still exists in a slightly different format. But oddly, 20 years later, I've introduced people to it now because,
Yeah.
if you want to know what a solutions architect does, it's difficult to kind of find that out, because if you don't work in that team and you don't do that job, or you haven't engaged with a solutions architect before, it's difficult to understand where they fit, and trying to get people to understand the context of a role, I think, is really important. So there's that bit about going and talking to people in industry and learning more that way. But going back to what you said, it's really important that we have quick fixes. So
Yeah.
being able to give someone a button to press that says, okay, I've typed in solutions architect, this is the 3-line version of what it does, that can help me be able to have a little bit more conviction when I'm talking to someone. That's the hard part, I think.
I'm hearing people, and I think actually you were maybe in one of the focus groups that we did around ChatGPT, and I think that people are using ChatGPT for this as well.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
explain the concepts, explain what a solutions architect does, and if you do it, I find that if I say do it so that a 12-year-old will understand, I'm going to understand it, and
yeah,
that's really good.
yeah.
Another thing you mentioned was the concept of effectively influencing the hiring manager.
Hmm.
Um, I really believe nirvana for a talent sourcer in particular is they identify 4 people, contact 4 people, they all say they're interested, and the hiring manager says yes to interviewing all 4, and wants to hire maybe all 4.
Yeah.
There's no wastage in that whatsoever. Anything that you've done to help your recruiters to be able to better influence hiring managers to say yes to seeing those candidates you've worked hard to kind of get on the hook?
Yeah, and I think that's where I think agency recruiters nowadays have to work harder, because they've got they've got to really push a candidate into a hiring manager, because they don't have the same relationships that, say, an in-house recruiter might have, or an RPO, because RPO is always kind of a harder place to be, because you're a supplier. And so I think there's an element of relationship building to get there. But the objection handling, and we've had discussions, funnily enough, about this week, really looking at giving the manager all the reasons that they possibly can to say yes rather than say no.
Yeah.
And that's about looking and matching. It's about understanding. It's a little bit more ethereal. It's hard to put it in writing. I think it's a lot about relationships and trust.
Mm.
So things that I'll always say to my teams are, tell your managers that you've got nothing to tell them. Tell them what you're doing, because if you don't tell them you're doing anything, they'll believe you're doing nothing, because
Yeah.
that's human nature.
Yeah.
So some of it comes about relationship building, but if you're thinking about how we could develop that into something else, it's how do we automate an update to a hiring manager that lets them know what's going on?
Yeah.
How do we tell them that we've spoken to 35 people this week, but only 3 have said they're interested? How do we get that message across so that hiring managers know we're doing hard work? And then when you're presenting those candidates, it's a case of, the potential. And that's a mindset shift as well. I talk about this an awful lot with our business. Let's think about hiring for potential. If we're looking for 105% fit and asking that person to walk on water, it's not going to happen. So there is an education piece that's more difficult, and it's almost harder for me to say, this is the solution.
Yeah.
I think the reality is it's a combination of hard work, trust, communication that's going to get there. But I think longer term, there will be solutions that will make the earlier part of the process easier for the recruiter. And that part then is where they add their value and their skill.
No, I couldn't agree more. I think some of this is about process and format and service level agreement, like two-way service level
Yeah,
agreement. And I'm a big
100%.
believer that hiring managers have to commit to their doing their part, getting back with
Hmm.
feedback,
Yeah,
giving the candidate plenty of time, omitting bias when it's possible, doing all those sorts of things.
yeah,
But then there is definitely something in there about intuition, and you can't automate everything in recruitment. And the bits around the negotiation with the candidate and negotiation with the hiring manager, that's the bit where really skillful recruiters excel at, and
Yeah.
you're very unlikely if you're happy to get rid of that, then you can probably automate the whole thing. But I don't think that would be a valuable thing to do.
I think when you're looking at the early, if you're looking at high volume,
Yeah.
Entry level roles,
Yeah.
and we've seen some of this happen in the States. I think it was Walgreens or somebody just said, yeah, well, send us a CV and come and start work for us, right? And
Yeah.
that's a very different way of working than when you're looking at, you wouldn't take a doctor on that merit, right? You'd want someone qualified to do that job. And I think it does depend on the skill level as to how far you can go with automation.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so to give us one last, if you've got any, like, either from like being a TA leader from a sort of high level perspective around the concept, or maybe just something tactical that you've implemented, give us one more thing that you think people should know about.
Oh, that's a difficult one.
I know, I'm sorry. As I was asking that question, I was thinking, I'm setting Claire up here. This is bad.
I know this was supposed to be a good conversation, right?
Sorry.
One more thing. I think for me, there's an awful, and I could go down a number of different routes here, but I think everyone will laugh when I say this that knows me because they're sick of hearing out about it, but data is your friend.
Yeah.
And I think that I've literally come off a call talking about exactly this. If we're saying that we want to influence diversity in SAP, but we know that diversity in SAP is 30% female in the market, there's no point in us chasing 50%.
Yeah.
But if the business are asking for that, and then they're being unrealistic. So, we kind of need to look at using data to support good decision making and to help you as a recruiter not go in unprepared, because I think so many recruiters will go and look at a job and go, oh, I've never worked that before, but I'll read the job description. That'll do me. I'll go and start word matching and I'll use, whatever tools I've got. But I think the reality is a little bit of preparation and data gathering will really work in your favor. I think that's probably where, and all the tooling that you're talking about, recruiter enablement, the stuff that's going to help you make better decisions and give better advice as well.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I think it's really vital. And it's interesting you used that example. I know you could have used other examples, but that particular example around, like, diversity, particular skill sets, what does the market look like versus what the business is trying to, set as an objective. That would be an example of talent intelligence. And when I think about recruiter enablement, the Venn diagram of recruiter enablement overlapping with so many different things. Shout out to my friends at Horsefly, who could probably give a really good answer to that particular challenge. Shout out. Do you want to give a shout out to anybody on that subject?
Oh, I possibly couldn't, Adam. It might be a difficult one. I might get myself in hot water.
Oh, okay. We'll leave that. No more tricky and unscheduled questions for you then, Claire. All right. Look, thanks so much for taking the time to come and join me today. Loads of great advice. We could have done this for about 3 hours, I think, knowing your experience. And look forward to seeing you again soon.